Greetings, fellow Homo sapiens. I'm here with my friend Laurie Dempster. He is a very old friend of mine who is on a similar journey of not knowing what the hell's going on. And we often try and compare notes and try and see if we can figure out what the hell's going on. Laurie Dempster, welcome to the program.
It is so good to be here, man. Thanks. Great introduction, by the way. I think that accurately describes us.
I'm trying my best. It's great to have you, and I'm trying my best out here. It's tough. These introductions are tough. In the beginning, I was just throwing out the same adjectives, and I still haven't. I got this one gimmick that I like that I'm keeping, which is I always say, "Welcome to the program." And I think that has some echoes of Letterman. I think that's like a Letterman type of thing to do. And he's a pretty big influence on me. So program, I do say that
it's very Midwest.
Yeah.
It's very Letterman. It's very Midwest.
Yeah. I had this other thing that I would do where I would like try and, but it only works if there's like ambiguity in how the person's name is pronounced. And like, I can't really think of how you would mispronounce Laurie Dempster, but often, I mean, a lot of the people that I talk to in India, there's usually like at least multiple. Sometimes there's like more than one correct way of saying, like my name, there's more than one correct way of saying it. And then there's the way that it gets mispronounced anyway. So that, I mean, I didn't name the show after that necessarily, but that was it. But, I can't do that with, I can't right now off the top of my head come up with a comedic mispronunciation of your name. But I'll work on it. Maybe next time we do.
I've had every different kind of mispronunciation. If the ones that I got were Maury and Larry and
yeah, I like that.
I mean,
that makes me. Yeah, I like that. Maury
because and that was back when Maury Povich had a show, and it was like I remember my paper route, and people were just like Larry, Maury, Larry,
yeah. Larry. That's great.
Good times.
Yeah, I used to get Arnold. Arnold is one that people would, and of course, when I worked at Tim Hortons, I was Jacob. That was a fun time.
Oh my goodness! Oh, I forgot about that. Right, you totally like anglicized yourself in order to.
No. It was the assistant manager. It was the assistant manager that she was like on the first day. She was like, I can't say that. I can't say your name, Jacob. And but I thought it was sweet. I mean, she was, it was hilarious. She didn't notify me that she was going to be calling me Jacob. She just started referring to me as Jacob without letting me know. And then, like, obviously, when no one was responding, and then I was like, "What's going on?" And then she's like, I realized she was talking to me. And then we cleared it up. And then later on, when the name tags were getting made, I kind of insisted that my name tag say Jacob.
Jacob.
And I still have that name tag. It's somewhere in a storage locker in Toronto. So we could talk about a lot of different things. We went to high school together. We were on the improv team together. Laurie is like one of the funniest people I know, and I think he's one of the funniest people that most people know. And I was one of these people in high school. I mean, I'm 2 years younger than you. In high school, that's a huge age difference. It doesn't seem like that now, but it was at the time. So I was just like this guy that was like following you around, trying to be funny by association, basically. And we were on the improv team together, and then we kind of we reconnected in university, and we were in the same economics class. That was like that economics class was my first class in university, like period. Like for day one, it was and it was a 2000. It was a second year course. It was intro macroeconomics, right? And actually, this is funny. So we already know each other really well, and this is my first day of like being in university out of high school. And we walk in, and it's a lecture theater, one of those U-shaped lecture theaters, and I sit down in one corner, and I'm like really sheepish. I don't know. I'm kind of scared to I don't know what's going on. And I come in, sit down, and on the other opposite end of that U-shaped thing is you sitting down on the other side. And I don't know how much of the jokiness of this we can get into for I think it's because the professor of that course is someone who's like well known now, so we maybe can't joke around about some of the silly things that would occur in that class.
Oh, yeah. I had forgotten who the prof was.
Yeah.
Oh, now I remember. Oh,
yeah.
Let's leave that name out of that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but can we describe the absurdity of the situation without naming the person? Would that no?
I think we should try.
We should try. Okay, I'm going to do this.
We should try.
Well,
okay.
I mean, it was surreal because like I'm totally sheepish. First university class, and the professor is she was kind of dressed in a way that was pretty provocative. I mean, she would frequently wear like a tube top, and again, like that would be alarming in the context of a university, sure, but it was extra alarming because I was just out of high school, and I'm walking into my first class in university, and she was wearing a pretty short skirt, and she's also really friendly, like extremely friendly, and I'm kind of like shyly like looking through the door, like wondering if I'm in the right place in the right class, economics, and I'm like yeah, and so she come in and sit, and so I sit down in the and then I look across the room and there's you, and you're. As soon as our eyes make contact, we're both like kind of like giggling and trying to hold in our laughter. And then as this first class, as it progresses, it just gets stranger and stranger and more surreal for me. Like, first of all, so this professor's now swearing and stuff and talking cool and stuff, which is that happens when you get to university or college. But it being my first university class, I was like, oh, wow. And the strangest part of all this, and there was a lot of weird things that were just really, it was weird. But
she may have been an economist, but she was very good at marketing. She knew who her audience was. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Well, so she'd hand out the course outline, and she says, if you have any questions, just come. You can grab me after class. That's my number right there. You can call me. That's my office hours, and if there's my home number. And just if you need anything, if you have any questions, just grab me after class. Just grab me after class. And I just remember that she would very often just say, "Grab me after class," and it's awkward. Like, again, I'm like 18. You know what I'm saying?
Super awkward.
And you and me are just like looking at each other. It was just like laughing. And she was an excellent professor. She was an excellent professor. She was very good. But it was surreal because it's one of these things that you're just like, what am I experiencing right now? What's going on? And I mean, there are other things that, like, I wouldn't want to give other details or funny kind of incidents that happen just because I don't want necessarily the person to be identified. Like, that would not be okay.
Yeah.
It was a surreal experience. And, we did, like, that was also the first course that, like, I struggled in the beginning, where I it really drove home the idea that, like, look, university course load is more difficult than high school. Like, you have to actually, like, study. And so I remember, like, the midterm, I bombed the midterm. I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't really got into I hadn't really fully imbibed what it meant to, like, study properly at a university level. But we loved that professor so much that we turned our grades around. Like, by the end of that semester, I had a 90, and it was all because she was an excellent professor.
She used to incentivize us. She would. I remember at one point she had bags of candy. This is a university prof teaching economics who had she would bring in her. It was like a briefcase, and she would throw like bags of candy to the people who would get the answer right when she was doing like an open discussion. Like, I had never seen that before. I'd never even seen that in high school.
Yeah, it was like a
certainly have not seen it since. So very kind of interesting teaching style. Very interesting style.
I absorbed the material ultimately. But there was unorthodox teaching methods. But the jokiness of the thing in the beginning aside, she was an excellent professor.
She really was, but it was a real shock, man. Like, that just the way her just approach to just students in general was just so relaxed that it was just you're kind of like, whoa, like my goodness.
Where are the boundaries here exactly? What's going on?
Yeah.
Well, we scheduled a meeting with her like when we were struggling, like after the first midterm. I remember we like met with her in the cafeteria like after class, and we got her to like explain, and we used both you and I, it's a
I had a hard time with economics in general. I mean, even though I was interested in it, the way that style of economics is taught, that like Keynesian economics is just so like, there's just so many, I don't know, there's like so many different like tree branches off of it. Like it's really hard. Like it's very difficult. It must have been tough for her to teach that. Like the concept of economics, like what's going on in the world, that's one thing. But it's like, no, you have to teach this certain style of economics with all these things that mean these certain things. And, it's this factor and that factor. And I just remember asking her about the money supply, and I was like, can you explain the money supply again? and then the money multiplier again? And she was like, okay, so it's this, and then $1 does this, but it also does this. And I'm sitting there going like, whoa, like wait, how, like, is there any other explanation for this, or is this just how it is? So anyway,
yeah, well, it's really, you're lucky. You're when you say, I mean, it's a great thing, when you say that economics you find it hard to understand, because it's a good sign. It means that you can be a great economist, because
right.
It seems like it's like that's the great thing about economics. The more it seems like you don't know what's going on. It's like, well, maybe you could be an economist. You maybe become I found macro to be easier than micro for some reason. That doesn't make sense to me even now that I should find it easier that way. But with macro, the sooner you accept that this is just a model and a crude one at that, the better off you are in terms of making sense of that particular model.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. Yeah, man.
No, too many people, and it feels patronizing and condescending that you actually even have to point this out. But too many people really think that model is something that is just equivalent to reality. Like this is just exactly how things are going to behave. And I mean, there's been a lot said and a lot written since about how that's not the case.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, there's definitely more than one way to explain. There's more than one way to explain what goes on in the world. And micro, I remember, was my first. Micro was actually my first course it was my first class of my first day at university, and it was micro. And I walked in, and it was I forget what his name was. He was from Norway, maybe it was Tronson or something like that. Anyway, his whole thing was. So you want to talk about our other prof knowing her market? This guy everything he talked about was beer or wine, and it was France and Germany, and that's what he would use, or Germany, France, respectively. And so he just thought, he was like, well, as long as I talk about beer, these because the class was mostly guys anyway. Like I don't know what that department skews, but it must be mostly guys or males or whatever. Well, which is such a shame.
For intro, I think you would get more of a gender balance, because for intro, micro, and macro, since they're mandatory for business, right? And business is one of those degrees that you just kind of, especially in that era, in that time, it was kind of like, if I don't know what I'm going to do at university, but I feel obliged to go to university, I'm going to do business. Like there's a big. I mean, that's how I ended up there.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. But you were saying?
I just remember I struggled with it right from the get-go. I mean, I don't think I ever had really great marks in economics, but
even the economists are struggling with it. I mean, like, have you listened, like, been reading what people are saying? It's hilarious. It's hilarious watching economists try to talk about anything, and if in particular if you take into account multiple points of view, you realize there's no reason why economics should be easy. Like it's way more complicated than it. Like it's several tiers downstream from like the hard sciences. There's so many variables. Yeah. I was listening to Eric Weinstein's podcast today. And I mean, I listened to the episodes repeatedly, but he was talking about how George Soros has this principle of, and you know, there's obviously some people that when you say that name, they freak out. But putting that aside, the principle of reflexivity, and he jokingly says it's like, this is a principle of reflexivity that George Soros is convinced he is unable to explain to any economist. I thought that was a funny way of putting it. But, you know, this idea that like the economy is something that emerges from human activity, but then when you have humans trying to then study this phenomenon that emerges from human activity, and then if they gain even a bit of insight into that and then change their behavior in aggregate as a response to what they've learned about the thing they're studying, then the thing itself changes because it's fundamentally emergent and downstream from our aggregate behavior. So it's like the two things control each other. And so it's like you have this thing that's quite a bit more complex, several orders more complex than any of the models that you know, in popular parlance that people talk about. But I find I understand more when I look at when things get broken down into smaller models, and then you accept that you're in a model, right? It's like to be in a model means you're holding a bunch of things constant. And when we're talking about the economy, we're really talking about a really huge number of factors that you're holding constant. When you accept that you're in the model, then you can kind of measure the effect of this thing or that thing. And then, you know, speaking of different frameworks, I recently had taken an online course through Coursera, but it was a course at Columbia, and it was money in banking.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, you sent me some links to that. Yeah, that was really interesting.
It was a great course. It was a great course, and a lot of the lectures are available for free anyway. But this guy, I mean, I always regretted not taking a money in banking course in university. Like I minored in economics, but I didn't take a money in banking course. And that whole system is so convoluted, and it's really interesting too. I also just finished reading The Ascent of Money, which is a history of the finance, and that's really something. But
Niall Ferguson's book, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one. But what was I saying? This course, Money in Banking, the approach that this guy uses to sort of explain what money is it's something that everybody should be exposed to. You know, like we go around using things like money and credit, and we don't fully even comprehend what it is. And his approach is that he looks at everything via cash flows. So what he talks about is that in like you know, in the Keynesian type models in the economy, you're not thinking about the money market, and then also in the stock market, like in that, like that whole end of things, it's also removed from the stock market. Like nothing ties like the actual things that are going on in the world and the money market into these models, and you need to look at the money market. So he has this really, and I'm probably explaining it poorly at a low resolution level, but he focuses more on.
Bang on.
he explains it through cash flows. So like everything is balance sheets. Like every entity that he's like, if he's got a central bank, it's about, you know, there's a balance sheet, you know, assets and liabilities, and then like he maps that to like, you know, say there's another entity, another bank. Everything is looked at as cash flows, and all the cash flows kind of have to match up. The assets and the liabilities have to match up. And it's really interesting when you think about looking at the economy in terms of flows rather than in terms of supply and demand models, the types of things we have. Looking at things via flows, like as a continuous fluid system, is really interesting. And I think there's some insight there.
Yeah, that's really, that's a good way of looking at it. I think I was going to thank you for sending over that one of Mark, I think his name is Mark Blythe, one of his lectures. Yep. Okay, so I ended up watching another one that he did last night, and I found it to be really interesting because he's got like, it seems like he's got sort of one kind of presentation called like how we got to where we are.
Yep.
And then, but he's got different ways of delivering it. And I actually found the one where he gave like the super simple kind of explanation. I actually found that better because he was saying, he's like, okay, so we have these sort of three different phases of economic model. We have one where we were on a gold standard, another one where we were basically still kind of quasi on a gold standard, but not really. We were actually just using the U.S. dollar to back everything so that the U.S. could run up huge deficits. And then the third one is when we basically repealed all the legislation that was basically all the restraints on the financial markets. And everything took off, and that's when inequality went crazy, and you had productivity skyrocket, but you had wages stagnate. Anyway, so that was fascinating. But the point that he made was he said no economist can explain how, since 2008, you could put trillions and trillions of dollars onto the public balance sheet and not see any inflation. And he said, nobody has an answer to that. Nobody. And I was sitting there going, that's one of the things I've been wondering about for years. Like, I've been going but it has shown up in certain ways, but not the crazy inflation that certain people were kind of starting to warn about. Like, you print this much money, like there are consequences, it's going to show up here and there, but it hasn't shown up.
Well, it's really interesting that you raise that point, because it really ties into this idea of understanding the limits of your model, right? Like, if you have an externality that should be showing up and it's not showing up, then it's like, hello, here's a reminder, you're in a model, it's not actually reality. Your model's probably leaving out where that externality is going, right? There's a hole in your model.
Right.
And there's always going to be a hole in your model. I mean, that's the nature of this scenario. And that's one of the reasons why, say, econometrics is such a joke, because it's like trying its best to, like, it's trying to apply first order reason for a problem that's too complex, right? It's like, if we just get all the data and all the variables and it's like a big data problem. But it's more like, I feel that you have to rely on some intuition and heuristics, because the level of complexity is too high. It's sort of, this might be like a really stupid analogy, but it's sort of like, it's reason and logic is great, analysis is great, but like, if you are in a fight or flight kind of situation, you don't have, it doesn't make sense to rely on your reasoning analytical faculties. You just use your heuristics to do the thing you need to do in the moment. Now, it's not exactly the same type of thing, but this is a scenario that's like so complicated for like a systematic, logical, deductive kind of approach. You have to rely on a different set of tools. You can't have the same amount of rigor as you do in like pure mathematics, where you can just do everything through deductive reason. And so you have to rely on certain other modes of thinking. And I've heard more than one person, commentator, economist, or whatever you call people that are in between commentator and economist, but more than one person has. It's hard to tell, right? Like, Eric Weinstein's an economist apparently, but he's a math guy. So it's you can just be an economist. This is what I mean. It's like, if you don't know what's going on, you're in great shape. So no,
you're perfect. You could write for The Economist.
Yeah, let's submit some. We'll submit this podcast to them tomorrow. But like, what was I saying just before?
I think we were talking about the complexity of the problem, and then how like models can't solve it. And
between the academics and the commentators, there have been multiple people that have suggested that economics needs to absorb things from other disciplines, and it's kind of like a lot of the humanities and things like sociology. So it had been siloed off for some time, So now you have these kind of emerging, maybe it's more than emerging, maybe it's moved beyond that, but you definitely have all these like behavioral economics, like, trying to take ideas from social psychology and things like that and put it into so that's important. You that whole, what do they call it, rational, homo rationalis or homo rational, that sort of assumption under the classical model, right? That people are just 100% rational. Like, look at my life choices; they're not rational. Like, what do I do? I'm a musician.
No.
It's like it's not. I'm not. It doesn't make sense.
That theory. That theory's totally been debunked. Like, you can't say that there's like rational, like the rational markets theory. Like no, just. Well, no. Even the name. You don't even need to be an economist. All you got to do is just read the news and then hear the term rational markets theory and go, no, sorry.
Yeah, nope. No, not today.
No.
So yeah, I think that's important. This Mark Blythe guy, I only discovered him a short time ago. You do the right thing when you find a sort of a thinker and then you check out a lot of their lectures, and it's worthwhile even when the points kind of overlap, because especially when you're talking about economics, it's a convoluted thing. So you need to hear these takes a few times to evaluate where there's insight, where it's nonsense. And I'm personally, I feel it's a good thing when there's a bit of gobbledygook, as you said, because it's like, I get suspicious if I agree with somebody 100%. I'm just like, what,
if he's not presenting ideas that are kind of challenging how your brain elasticity, then then you're probably not really looking for enough stuff. Because I had to watch. I will admit that I went and I rewound parts of his look at me, born in the 80s, rewind. I rewound parts of his talk 4 times.
Yeah, I do that enough times. Yeah.
Oh man, he was using terms that I was like, okay, I don't really know what that means. I will admit that I don't know what that means. I got to rewind and listen, and it was definitely challenging. And at first I'm kind of like, I don't know if I agree with that, but let's not turn him off. Let's kind of rewind and listen again and see. Okay, well, let's just think that through, and
And it's not even like you have to agree. You just need to see where it fits into his train of thought and how much it affects his conclusions. You know what I mean? Like that whole idea of being fairly agnostic about how you take these packets of information, that's also part of it. Sometimes when we are conditioned by certain words and concepts, and I mean, when economics is really bad for this, certain words trigger really strong moral responses in people and really polarizing moral responses. Something like a word like free market, and it's shocking. Free market isn't even a jargony kind of word. It directly describes the thing that it's trying to describe. But even that is filled with such polarizing connotations, where some people really uphold it as something that symbolizes freedom, whereas other people uphold it as a euphemism. It invokes a euphemism for inequality and class conflict. You know what I mean? And so if you're coming at these words with these emotional connotations, even a fairly jargon-free phraseology like free market, right? It's not ambiguous about what it's trying to describe. Like words like capitalism and socialism are 1 degree separated from that a little bit, right? You can be pretty confused about what those words imply if you just hear them with no context, if you've never encountered those concepts before. But free market comes pretty close to sorry, go ahead.
They get politicized. I mean, that's the kind of thing, the term free market gets used as a sword and a shield. You get guys who talk about, well, I'm a free marketeer, and it gets used in a political term. And it's like, oh, well, my opponent, on the other hand, it's like, oh, well, why can't you both be free? I'm sorry, what? If you're a free marketeer, what's the other guy?
Well, that's what happens when things are politicized. You got to choose, right? I'm the freedom guy. And then it gets to the point where it's I'm the free market guy. I'm the freedom person because I'm and the other person definitely isn't. And then
there's your campaign slogan, the freedom guy.
No, that's the full. It should be the full. I'm the freedom guy, and the other person definitely isn't. And if you keep saying the other person definitely isn't, the other person's against freedom, against free markets, against free market, then eventually they're actually we're against free markets because we're against you. And so then this word then starts to have this connotation where it starts to be far removed from describing the thing that you were trying to describe, and it becomes this okay, so if that person has X type of emotional reaction to the word free market, then we know where they belong. We know where to file them. And
that's the psychological part of economics, man. That's where I really feel like economics needs more pieces of the pie, where you could include things like psychology and that could really be helpful, because it might try to what it might do is it might take some of the sting out of these words.
Well, in terms of taking the sting out of these words, I'm more about. I think I'm more on the side of just not using them. I don't think I can make an argument for abolishing them, because I can't tell people to stop using words. But I feel like the only thing I can advocate for is just the utter meaninglessness of those words. Because let's take words like, first of all, like you just have to accept how language changes, right? You have to accept how language changes and how it's like basically a social contract. Like words only mean what we generally agree that they mean. And if we can't maintain a coherent semblance of what we agree they mean, then it doesn't matter how much you want a word like capitalism or socialism to mean something specific so that you can make a specific point. If the whole underlying contract of the meaning we imbue that word with sort of gets fuzzier and fuzzier, then my feeling is that at some point you have to throw up your hands and be like, okay, look, I can't sensibly apply any of these words to myself because they just have so many weird, blurry meanings. But if I'm talking to somebody else that's using these words, the best I can do is understand what they mean as earnestly as possible when they're using them, and then insert that definition whenever they use them. You know what I mean? That's the most good faith thing you can do. But I can't apply these words to myself in any sensible way. And the way that I like to describe it is that even at the academic level, like at the scholarly level, if you take one of these words, capitalism, socialism, and many others, I'm just using those. Even at the academic level, you will not get a coherent picture of what those words mean across. So then, if at the academic level you don't even have you have a pretty blurry word, what happens when you take it out into pop culture? Then the pop culture smudges it out even more, and that doesn't even get into connotations, right? Like it's like each disparate definition will then have its disparate set of connotations that are associated with it. How are we supposed to use these words to have sensible discussions? And you can tell that when you can tell that we're arguing about stupid shit when we're talking about the things that we care about by second, third, fourth degree reference. You know what I mean? We're no longer talking about the actual, like, what do we do about healthcare, or what do we do about, the technology sector? Like we're no longer talking about what we do about sustainability. We're just using weird ideological words that have no consistent meaning. And we're just arguing about that. And that's a big root of the dysfunction, I think. I mean, that's my sense.
It gets dangerous too, because that certain words mean certain things in certain situations. So all you have to do, I mean, if you're talking about politics, all you have to do is say the word healthcare.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you can deduce from that one word, okay, well, if he's talking about healthcare, he's talking about reforms. If he's talking about reforms, then he's talking about socialized medicine. If he's talking about socialized medicine, then he or she is X, Y, and Z, and I know everything there is to know about that person. All they did was say one word, and you're like, wait, what? Hold on a minute. Hold on. Why can't we just have a conversation? It's like, no, you're a commie.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's what I mean. It's that is mind numbing, and so that's why I'm really reluctant to apply any of these labels to myself. I realize it's kind of like I don't want to label myself this kind of, but it's like, no, like actually all of these labels are breaking down, and they have been for a while. Some of them have been breaking down for a long time. Even think about this neoliberal, right? Like that word is a hot word right now. Like everything that's what I'm saying. Nobody knows. Like I can like, I'm not going to say, look, I can construct a definition of neoliberal if I have to. If I have to like take the average of what everybody's complaining about right now in the fucking, out there in the media and the commentariat, you can give some fuzzy approximation of what neoliberal is. But in practice out there in social media, regular people are throwing it around. They don't know what the hell that means when they're just shouting at somebody saying, you're a fucking neoliberal. We need to like, nobody knows what that means. And here's a test. Here's the test for it. Who fucking openly identifies as a neoliberal? Who's out there saying, you know what, I'm going to make, like, can you think of anybody? Like, this is the thing. Like, I was watching this debate between, it was a debate within the quote left, right? Where you had this more, you had this more center liberal guy, and you had the person on the far left. They're basically like communist, like they're siding with the sort of social democrats, but what they really want is communist, and they're in their 20s, late 20s, and they were having a friendly debate. They're colleagues, I guess, and the centrist guy said basically was like, I don't know anybody that identifies as a neoliberal, but I guess I'm gonna have to identify as that and just like make some approximate guess about what that means.
What?
Just, yeah. So like, this is the thing now. Like, it's very weird. Everything, and here's another thing: anything can get memeified in this current information landscape, right? So like let's say why is centrist a bad thing? Like people now, so you must be a centrist. Oh, you must be one of those classical liberals. Or it's like, you must be a leftist. Like you pick a thing. You pick a thing you want to be. All I got to do is put scare quotes around it, and now that's a shitty thing to be. You know what I mean? Like, like I kind of like hesitantly sometimes think of myself as heterodox, but all you got to do is like, if it catches on, right? If the word heterodox catches on, then it's like, so you must be one of those heterodox people, I guess. You don't even have to give an explanation. Like that's the way that discourse is online. And so that's another fucking Pandora's box. Like I just talked about this thing. I just rambled about it for a short time. And even that is stupid. Like it's not even like we gain no insight about the world other than people have a loose grip on meaning. I
gained some insight because what's heterodox? I got to be candidly tell you, I've never heard. What's that? I've never heard of that.
Heterodox is not the opposite of orthodox, although it's kind of like if instead of thinking of the opposite of orthodox as a binary, imagine like maybe something like a triangle or something. So like if you're going away from orthodoxy, heterodoxy is one of the ways you can go there, which means you're willing to just take from lots of different points of views and synthesize. I mean, again, it's my what the depth, but
man, can you imagine where this ends up? Where it's just like, so you're one of those quote unquote open-minded people, are you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well,
come on.
Up is down. Up is down. You can do this.
Yeah.
We can. I mean, we've seen it happen so frequently in the discourse, right? Where like you memify something enough, and it just becomes a jokey thing. Like all of these words are losing meaning. Like if you look at the meaning of the word populist as sort of put forward by the mainstream media. And then you look at the word populist as put forward by somebody like people like Crystal and Sagar on that show Rising. They have a completely different definition of the word populist, and it's a positive one, and they're trying to spread that one around. Then you got a guy like Steve Bannon who will try and somehow meet both definitions. He'll like market it as the positive populism, and then like he's doing God knows what. In the meantime, man, these words, they're meaningless. And so the only solution I have is to talk about things as directly as possible. Like talk about the thing as directly as you can. Do not use the buzzwords. Do not use, try to remove as much jargon as you can from your discourse.
I can see the attack ad now for open-minded. It's like my opponent's open-minded, which means he hasn't made up his mind about anything, which means he's on the fence.
Well, it's easy, done. I mean, no, but that's already happened. We've already seen that, right? Like, because you have that with the concept of flip-flopper, which is like, you mean like, like that's done. It's done already. Like, this person changed their mind after they got new information. They're a flip-flopper.
Oh, do you remember what happened to Mitt Romney? You remember what they did to Mitt Romney because
John Kerry.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that's done. It's not even a joke. The thing you said is not even a joke. That's actually the thing that they do. And you're a funny guy, so just imagine that. Like we have a great stand-up comedian over here, and it's not, the joke is not as good if it's delivered by me, and it's not as good if it's not delivered in Hindi. But he's a really political comedian, and he's given the government a hard time in his jokes, and he's really popular. And he in his bit, he's like in the airport, and a politician comes there. He's like, son, listen, you're a funny guy, but how about you leave politics to us? And he's just like, well, uncle, like I saw that you guys stopped doing politics, and so somebody had to kind of start, and then and then I took a look over, and I took a look over, and I saw you guys started telling jokes, But yeah, it's much better in Hindi.
No, I know what you mean though. Yeah.
It's a farce. There's so much of this. It's just it's a farce.
It's got to be tough for comedians to even match the level of absurdity of what political theater has become. Because I remember when I first became aware of The Daily Show, and when I first became aware of guys like Louis Black. Mm-hmm. Like they were doing stuff that was so funny. It was pretty kind of raw. It was kind of on the line, but they were also really skewering comedians. And then as that style of political humor got more and more popular, more and more shows popped up, the style of politics changed right along with it in the same way, and probably even faster than they could adapt to it. And now it's to the point where, somebody making fun of a political attack ad is not even 10% of what they actually are. And this is 2020. Think how far we've come.
It's crazy.
It must crazy. Be so tough. I can't imagine being a writer for Seth Meyers or for any of those shows that have to churn out stuff on a daily basis that is so can you imagine, something like Gerald Ford or Ronald Reagan walking up to an airplane with a piece of toilet paper stuck to their shoe? That would have been years and years of material. That would have defined the whole presidency. But now it's maybe 18 minutes later, it's nope, we're on to the next thing.
Yeah, well, it shows in the comedy. It's frankly, the comedy hasn't been able to keep up. It's the actual Gong Show is, and it's happening all over the world as well. That's another thing. Over here, we have a few comedians who've been able to. I mean, there's a lot of silly things that go. The situation over here is serious, but there's also plenty of silliness to joke about. But in the U.S., and in the Western world, but I guess particularly the U.S., I don't think anybody. We've at the same time become used to it because it just on a daily basis you get bombarded with so much craziness. But just a short time ago, over 5 years ago, which is a short time, technically. I don't know. Technically, I'll take that out. It doesn't make any sense. Technically, it's a short time. Technically, in relation to what? Is it technically a short time? I don't know what that means. It's a short time in relation to the long.
Technically, Jacob, it's a short time. So
it's a short time in relation to the long arc of history. But 5-6 years ago, who would have imagined that we'd be in the midst of such a Gong Show? And you can also sense the public, and I mean the public around the world, is just losing confidence in institutions that seemed immovable. And it's getting into everything. It relates to comedy. It relates to entertainment. We're even our sense of role models and stars is breaking down, and fans and stardom. If you look at the cringe-worthy sort of. That all those celebrities did that Imagine song. It was Gal Gadot.
Oh, yeah.
And that is really interesting if you imagine that from the point of view of it's not so much that they're way lamer all of a sudden. It's just that something has changed in the public's appetite for that kind of stuff. I feel like if We Are the World came out today with everybody, everyone would hate it.
Oh, they just roll their eyes at it.
Yeah, it's what the fuck is this? All these stupid people, celebrities singing We Are the World, fuck this shit. So, and the same thing happened with all those celebrities that did a montage video about, owning up to their white privilege. And everyone's just fuck this shit. We don't care. People don't have the patience for, it seems like people like celebrities. So I think that indicates an underlying lack of trust throughout society, right? In all types of institutions, right? And even in entertainment, even in things like comedy, there's this chasm where all of the people that we know are hilarious, that actually make hard-hitting social commentary. I shouldn't say all of them, but many of them. It's all of a sudden those kind of comedians get all kinds of flack for saying offensive things. But then you look at there's this whole other crop of super woke comedy that's just not funny. Sometimes it's funny, there are some exceptional characters within that crop, but for the most part, this woke comedy isn't really funny. But then there's this sense that the mainstream sort of media outlets are pushing this content as a way to like make it seem like they're all about diversity and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so people see through that. And so like that ties into the underlying lack of trust. It's like people know that like, hey, this stuff is really funny and it's good social commentary that actually has a point. And you have mainstream outlets just like shitting on it, but the public loves it. And then you have mainstream outlets showing you this like content that's supposed to be edgy and witty and all about, diversity and inclusion, and it's not funny. And then you look at the people that are getting like Dave Chappelle's like, he's plenty diverse. Like I want my Chappelle back. You know what I mean? And you had this you had this scenario, like I think it was Rotten Tomatoes or whatever, where like the reviews that his special got from mainstream sources were all super negative, complaining about him.
Yeah.
Not his most recent one, obviously. Not the.
Are you talking about his Netflix ones? The
handful
he did in a row, the comeback tour thing. Yeah.
Wasn't it the case that like there was a bunch of mainstream outlets that shit on it and talked about how problematic it was, but in terms of like the public and even people from all backgrounds gravitated, and it got like really good, like the actual public rating of it was very high. So there's this huge disparity in what we're told we're supposed to like and the things that we is resonating with people. And you see this across institutions. You see it happening in entertainment. There's a bit of it there in comedy. It's been happening in music for ages, and so music is kind of ahead in a certain way. Actually, that's a different topic. Music was the canary in the coal mine. If you think about the way the economy has changed, all the stuff that's happening to everything else, whether it's journalism, film, or even things like cabs and hotels. The first thing to be affected was music. Yeah. But that's another topic that's really interesting. But the main point that I want to kind of get across before I end this particular rant is there is a lack of trust in all institutions, and the institutions seem to be saying no, we got this. Remember, we're the institutions. Remember, you love us. The institutions, and people are like, no, man, I don't know if I believe in any of these institutions. And you see it across society, across all these different. But anyway,
I was going to say, I feel like this is the kind of moment where it honestly, like I watched the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary recently, and I rewatched bits and pieces of it again, like more recently, and he makes this great he constructs this great argument about how there was a certain level of trust, maybe not 100%, in the 60s and 70s, but there was a certain level of trust with institutions, and it completely deteriorated. And in some ways, they never really kind of got it back. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is kind of a similar type moment where there was a certain level of trust. I don't know what it would be, but it's all kind of deteriorated.
Yeah.
And no one is very much interested in kind of. They're not really even interested in engaging in discussion anymore. It's sort of like they're just so tired of the last 4 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if it's too much. The pace, the tempo is just so.
And it was so building
quick,
up.
It's so fast.
It was building up before that. I mean, I want you to keep going, but it was building up before the 4 years, and the 4 years was like. The thing that we're going through now is I'm a believer that it's a symptom.
Well, it would have been, I guess, if you go back to 2008. I mean, that's the other when President Obama won. I think McCain tapped Palin, and they tapped into something. Oh, I'm sorry, my phone's ringing.
That's all right, man. It happens. No, they tapped into something, and then that something has been sort of ricocheting through society for a while, but there were parallel movements happening around the world, and we see that like the underlying conditions for a lot of the weird stuff that's going around the world was you have living in India now, having lived in a few different places, the general sentiment of people feeling. People have a sense of the rot in institutions that was present. And you can, if you want to talk about institutional rot and how it kind of led to this, you can apply that same lens to here in India, and you can apply it to the West. People were just fed up, and they're willing to just bet on something crazy and try anything else. That's part of it. I mean, there's lots of other factors, but the general apathy that people had towards the existing system is a big factor.
I agree. Sorry, hang on a second. My kids are invading. Hang on a second.
Hey, it's all right.
Hello.
You have to do something.
What?
Yeah.
We're deciding on dinner for tonight.
Oh, that's great. At this point in the conversation, we were joined by Lori's two delightful young children. It was, however, a little bit chaotic and perhaps slightly too incoherent to include in this podcast, so I did remove it. We will now rejoin the conversation just as they are leaving the room. That was precious. That was amazing.
Oh, that was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
She heard that there's a lot of COVID in India. There you go.
She's not wrong. That's a fact. That's correct. We are number 3 in the world right now. So.
Are you really?
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
We started off really low, and then we came in on the sleeper, sleeper upsurge. But and Bombay's the worst hit in India, and so here I am.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Have you you've just been like housebound, I guess, or?
Yeah, housebound since March, and the scenario is pretty weird. I mean, I don't want to get into too many of the details. I had the last podcast I had a journalist on, and she actually in the middle of when lockdown started, she was the one that volunteered and said, "Hey, I'll travel around the country and cover this," and. So that's what she did, and so yeah, I was speaking to her on my last podcast. But
cool.
It's been a very weird situation. It's definitely affected India in some unique ways that has not manifested in other parts of the world. But I'll leave it up to you and the listener to research that, because there's too many tentacles of weird things that could get me into trouble if I talk about it in that particular mess. But I've been productive. I mean, I started a podcast out of it. I've released had a few good releases, throughout this time. I was in a place where I kind of needed the world to slow down. So, I've been
cool,
doing. What have you been up to? What have you been doing?
I mean, a similar kind of thing where I've been working from home since March. I'm pretty lucky. I work in the tourism industry, so been working from home. It's been, we've had some kind of ups and downs here, but for the most part, I think we haven't had like a domestically transmitted case where we are for more than a month now, I think. So, I mean, in some ways we're in good shape, but in some ways I think no matter where you are, you're still pretty concerned.
Yep. That it's a weird situation. It's unprecedented. It's interesting that the whole world is just going through this together. And I wonder what's going to happen. It's scary. I wonder what's going to happen when we come out of it. There's been a lot of interesting developments that have happened, especially around the kind of thing that we're doing right now. I've seen a lot more conversations emerge, and I think that's a good thing. I think people having longer, in-depth conversations and sharing those things is much better than. I think I've said this several times on my podcast now. I sound like a broken record, but longer, in-depth conversations is a lot better than the hot takes that we're used to and that we were kind of raised on.
Oh man, long form is where it's at. I mean, yep. I remember the first time I ever saw Inside the Actors Studio. Mm-hmm. I was like, "Whoa, this is like an hour." I mean, I know that's not the first time that anyone ever sat down and had an hour-long conversation. There's been long-form interviews put on radio and TV and recorded for decades. But I just remember when I saw that and just the way that the interviewer prepared for the interview and the way that they were able to basically just sit kind of one-to-one and just kind of talk through different phases of a person's life or different aspects of a situation. I remember thinking this thing's got some legs. And then I remember when I first discovered podcasts, I think the first podcast that I ever listened to, I think were just Actually, you know what it was? It was Meet the Press, the first podcast I ever listened to. Yes, and what they would do is they just took the audio track from the show on Sunday, and by Sunday night, Monday morning, they had taken Meet the Press and they put the audio track out, and that was the first podcast I ever listened to, and that was, oh man, that was so long ago, but it was, it's a great medium. It's a really, really great medium, and like YouTube's really helped with that because the way that people can put conversation out. I mean, even just like that guy's talk, that Mark Blythe's talk.
That's another thing. Like the access that you have to actual lectures. Like I do not have a Netflix account, and I just exclusively listen to lectures, podcasts, online courses. Like that's my thing. Like I'm not up on the shows and stuff that people watch. So it's like I'm either doing music or I'm doing some type of other learning. And I'm kind of addicted to listening to lectures on various topics, because the more that I learn about history, about economics and sociology, the humanities, the more that I learn about humanities, and when you dig into certain thinkers who've really specialized, you start to it's not so much that people start to contradict each other. Like it's more that like more pieces of this story and this map starts to fill in, and I really like that aspect of it. And it's just amazing that, like, for example, you know, a really trendy guy who's brilliant but super trendy, so everybody will know the name. But like, say a guy like Yuval Noah Harari, right? Like, you pick up his book *Sapiens*, you read it, it's a page turner. You're like, wow, what an amazing sensation that was for my brain. You go, you find his other books, you read his other 2 books, you're like, wow, what an amazing sensation for my brain. And then you can type his name into your podcast app, and there's all these lectures that he's given, and all these interviews that he's done, and all these podcasts that he's done. And like, if you absorb it all, and you can leave it on while you're doing anything, right? Like, it's either you can listen to music or you can listen to people explaining stuff to you, or having conversations. And I love that I can get in depth with certain thinkers. Like, I love that that there's so many different Nassim Taleb lectures that are just available. I've seen all of them. Every time there's a new lecture, and he's a terrible public speaker. It's hilarious. He leans into it. He's just like, public speaking is stupid. You know, like I'm an author, and he mumbles, and it's hilarious.
Have you seen him on Bloomberg? You seen his interviews on Bloomberg?
Yeah.
Oh, do you see they're so good.
Do you see the one where this was an early one, pre-financial crash, where he was like on TV trying to warn people, and he was like freaking out. He was like angry. He's like one of these people that's like angry and pissed off, like for people's benefit. Like when I first read, the first book of his I read was Black Swan, and I was taken aback by his like curmudgeonly, like antagonistic nature. But I've come to generally be a proponent of it, because he's usually taking jabs at the right type of things, even when it seems like he's not. Somehow it works out that he is. Like, he will defend really strange things, and then somehow it works out that like actually there was a grain of sensible, no kind of thing he was saying. He's gone after like things like medicine, but he's gone after medicine pretty prominently. He once defended homeopathy. Yeah. He defended it, not because he says it works, but because it prevents people from going to the doctor, and that's a good thing. It prevents people from going to the doctor when they don't have to. And it's like,
he's great. He's got this. Yeah. He's got the right amount of sort of what would the term be? He's got the right amount of kind of sort of down home kind ofness, where he loves,
except down home is Lebanon. That's the best part. It's like down home, but it's like, but also very American as well. Yeah.
Well, he's got, his thing is like the three people that you care about, or the 3 things you care about, are your butcher, your barber, and your favorite restaurant. Yeah. And he's like that, and that's all you should care about. And he talks about bodybuilding, and he was one of the first guys that I ever heard, or when I read The Black Swan, was how much he would rip into elites, but specifically academics.
Yep, yeah, it's hilarious.
And the distinction that he made between being a scholar and being an academic, I remember that being kind of eye-opening. I was like, okay, that's a really different way of looking at it. Oh, that's cool, yeah. And how little, he has no patience for...
Yeah, none. He has great take on scientism. like taking down people that like apply sciences in religious kind of ways, like in the wrong type of scenarios. People that take science put science in sockets where you're not supposed to stick it, basically, or misusing science. He's good at that, and he has an amazing takedown of IQ.
Oh yeah.
Have you read that one? Oh, it's on my web page. It's in my recommended content section.
Okay.
Excellent takedown of IQ. And yeah, but he's awesome. I could talk about him for hours. His ideas are great. I've read all of his books. I've any lecture that's available, I devour it. He has a really cool recent one about localism, where he's basically trying to like reimagine like ground up type organization for society. And he's saying like, if you want to live in a communist society, you should have the choice and freedom to live in a communist society, which is why, you know, like we should focus more on localized government. So if you don't like living in this jurisdiction, there's a communist canton like right over here, and you go live there. That's cool. You know, like
man, city states like that's. Some people think that's where it's at. City states, you know, it's like, yeah, why not? It worked for thousands of years, you know.
I've been wrestling with that idea a lot because it's like I think probably cities. Well, here's the thing with cities. Forget city states, but cities are longer lasting entities than anything else, right? Bombay is older than the Republic of India.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
sure,
yeah. You know, like London is older than England. Rome is much older than Italy. You know,
St. John's is older than Canada. Mexico City's older than Mexico.
Yeah. And the borders of these nations keep changing. Like we another thing I have with the way we think about history is that we tend to think of like, you know, German history as if like there was a Germany like for thousands of years. It's like no, like like the Italy, like that's a new thing. You know, these are new boundaries and new borders. And the thing with nations, states, and similar entities that occurred previously is that like they often have like the lifespan that's just a little bit longer than a human life. So from the point of view of a human, it seems like this like unshakable, unmovable entity. But the lifespan of these entities are short enough such that somewhere in the world, some boundaries are going to change in a drastic way in your lifetime. And the sooner you realize that these boundaries are, you know, not so defined, and they also don't represent continuous sort of monolithic histories. Like you see that as in nationalism, where they try to tie in, you know, being a citizen of a place to some monolithic history that goes back thousands of years. Yeah. And it's like things are more disparate than that. Now, from an intuitive point of view, I think that the focus on city states, focus on municipal government, local politics is more important. It's a weird thing for a guy like me to say who's like lives in multiple parts of the world, but that's what I feel like makes sense. The thing that runs up against for me is that it seems like humans do like to have some sense of belonging to some larger culture. Like it changes depending on the scenario. Like if you're in South America and you're from Brazil, you might be proud to be Brazilian and be weirded out if somebody mistakes you for an Argentinian.
Right.
But if you like leave South America, you maybe get a sense of feeling proud, like a sense of being South American. And then when you're in Brazil, maybe you're like very specifically like, listen, I'm from Sao Paulo. Like, don't, you know, that's my identity. I don't know, but I experienced that. Yep. I experienced that like when I'm in Newfoundland, I'm an Indian, but like if I'm in Toronto, I'm a Newfoundlander. And then if I come to India, I'm a Canadian. And I feel like I belong to, so like, I mean, I could ramble about that for a long time too, but the general idea that I'm trying to get at is that there is this like natural sense for identification, and it sort of changes. It's flexible, and it moves in and out. It breathes. It's not rigid, but it's there, and it sort of helps with organization. And so the thing that I kind of struggle with is like, what's the right primary unit of organization? And I still lean towards like municipalities and cities. But like, how many levels should you have in between, you know, like, or above that? Like, do we get rid of provinces? Should it be more like municipalities and then counties, like, and then a nation? Or do you get rid of nations and just have lots and lots and lots of smaller? Like, there's so many different ways you can conceptualize that. And obviously none of this is going to happen tomorrow, but it's more just like what's going to be the thing for the future generations? What makes sense?
Well, that's really interesting because, it's funny because you brought up Newfoundland. Newfoundland and Labrador has got to be the only place in North America that doesn't have counties. Yeah. Every other province, every other state has counties. And the way that we were organized probably because of the culture at the time, which would have been based around the fishing industry, was they just kind of used bays. Mm-hmm. It was just kind of like bays and coves. It was like, well, you got Trinity Bay, you got Conception Bay, you got Notre Dame Bay. Okay, well, that'll be just this area, and then we're good. And there was no sort of localized government at that sort of county level set up. And so they basically, like, in the 90s, they kind of had to create that. So they designed these regional economic development boards, or REDBs, and they stuck them in different places and said, like, okay, this place is going to be for this place. And they created like 18 of them, but it was essentially the same thing as like a county system, but they put it in afterwards. Mm-hmm. And nobody identifies with it at all. And it's only, it's an apparatus of government. And so it's interesting just to kind of see the way that played out. So, yeah. I mean, I think I would leave it up to the listener to decide if that made a difference or not. But it certainly is. It certainly is an interesting case study in how sort of the tiers of localized government was designed and kind of created.
And there's so many ways that it can be conceptualized. Again, you see this when you go around the world. You see the different ways in which societies are organized. Even a word like nation is not it goes back to what we were saying about definitions. It's not consistent. Like, I remember when I was living in Scotland, and there I was in 2007, 2008 in the United Kingdom or Great Britain, and it's like this nation with a bunch of nations inside of it, and what is that? And then you realize that America was founded as the United States, so it's actually a bunch of states that are supposed to be united in this larger federal structure, and that's why. So it's like it's weird because Americans have this sense of being American, but then like there's this states' rights but what is that? And then then you think about the European Union, and then it's like, well, were they just trying to kind of counterbalance the U.S. by making a loose union of states? And what is that? And then like each place you go in the world, you see that these things, like what does it mean? And by the time I got back to Canada from my stint in Scotland, Quebec had declared itself as a nation within a nation. Oh, right. And like, what does that even mean? Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't mean anything. I'm just saying I don't know what it means. It just like what it's very confusing.
Well, they had to have something to replace empires, I guess, and so they just picked. Well, we'll just have nations, and this will be a way to collect a whole bunch of taxes and do stuff. And
yeah. It's weird. I've been rambling a bit too much in this conversation, and we were going to start with this, but I think so. A couple of years ago, you wrote a few pieces about kind of some concerns you had, economic concerns. I believe something about household debt in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. And to give people an idea of the types of things we like to think about. You want to just maybe give a rundown of what your concerns were when you were writing those pieces, your loose collection of concerns, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just, like most Canadians, I think I just saw the way that housing prices in particularly Toronto and Vancouver, I mean, maybe you can speak to how, you spent some time in Toronto, but housing prices in Toronto and Vancouver were going crazy. And we were coming up on, it had been about 8 years since the financial crisis, and I just started doing some research. Just a guy, just like if we want to talk about definitions, it's just a guy with an open mind, and I just wanted to know a little bit more about what was going on. So I wrote just more of like I guess you could call it maybe an article about the Canadian housing market and what it looked like back then. And it was kind of frightening, just some of the numbers that I was turning up. In terms of what certainly debt looked like, private debt, individuals, consumer level debt, which was which was very high back then. It's still about the same, I think. Bank debt or bank leverage back then, and still to this day, is very high. Not as high as it got in the 2008 crisis, but certainly on an international level. But like in Canada, it's pretty scary. I think just the way that banks were able to leverage. Since then, there's been new mortgage legislation that's come in, national legislation. So banks are required to hold more capital against their loan book. So that certainly, I think if you're concerned about that stuff, you should be at least somewhat comforted by that. Yeah. But it was something that I didn't know enough about, and I wanted to learn about, and I ended up writing. I ended up writing a few pieces about it, but certainly the debt level was the big one. And I ended up writing a couple other things. One that I wrote about was, which was like super dry and boring. It was about SME succession, small and medium-sized enterprise succession, and how that related to demographics, and how you have all these sort of old business owners, and they all want to retire, and they all want to sell their business, and they all think their business is worth X, and it's actually worth less, and there's not going to be enough buyers in order to take over those businesses. Yeah, that was pretty scary. And then I wrote another one about derivatives because I was really interested in that. That kind of like,
that's a crazy topic.
Derivatives are nuts. That's, you want to talk about gambling. Just going to a casino. That's what derivatives are. Derivatives are. I'll borrow. I think either Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger. I think he said that derivatives are the weapons of mass destruction of the financial world. They are. The total value of all the outstanding derivatives is like dwarfs the total value of everything else in the world by, I don't know, 100-fold or something like that.
Yeah,
because it's just bets.
It's really weird.
It's just like it's bets in a casino. It's like
it's pure speculation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's scary, and so many people are not financially literate, and I don't blame them actually, because I try and find, the more I try and learn about economics and finance, the more it seems it still seems convoluted. I'm kind of convinced that nobody has the full picture, but I'm also surprised at how many professionals don't seem to really understand what they're dealing with.
No, all you got to do is just read the news. Just look at the number of really smart people that get into trouble every day. And it's either because they didn't fully understand what they were doing, or they decided to do something that was maybe kind of shady. But usually it ends up being, I was doing this thing and I didn't fully understand the risks that I was taking. Or you look at what happens in the banking sector, where every day you hear about, well, maybe not every day, but you hear pretty consistently about practices that take place in the banking sector, and people just kind of go along with it, and they're like, this totally makes sense. There's a guy who's like, he's just, this guy's fresh out of school, and he's my investment advisor, and he told me to buy X, Y, and Z, and now there was some kind of a downturn, or the tide went out, and all of a sudden, I have half the money that I had before, and it's because I thought this guy was smart, and it's crazy, man.
Everybody thinks somebody else knows what's going on.
Well, that's what's crazy. It's like, they think, everyone else thinks, well, this guy's pretty smart, therefore I'm just going to do what they're doing.
But even within, like, you have clients that have trust in their bankers, but then you have, even within the banking and finance, you just have people that don't know what they're doing and are faking it and assume that other people know what's going on. Like, everybody just thinks, okay, somebody knows how this works, right? Like, that's the sense that I get whenever I've kind of looked into the types of things people say, and types of, like, I was looking into the culture at, like, say, a place like Goldman Sachs after, say, 9/11, right? And you hear accounts of how the culture, like, actually made a pivot and turned towards a more, like, that was an investment bank that in the past, at the very least, say whatever you want about them, they had some ethos of, like, we have to provide good results for our clients because that's what brings them back and makes them stay with us. But at some point, there was like a change in the culture where it's like, we're just trying to get as much from them right now as we can. And if you're a young guy coming up in that environment, you're just getting trained that way. Like you just assume that this is just the way it is, right? And like you see examples of this in, say, like that movie The Big Short, where it gets lampooned. But I've met people like this in real life, right? Like I was telling this, we were talking about this yesterday when we were planning this, right?
Yeah.
There was an investment over here. I won't name I'll make up a fake name. Let's call the bank SPF. There's no bank in India SPF that I know of, but let's say it's SPF, and they have a division called SPF Life, and it's this type of investment where you pay into it a certain amount every year, like for 10 years, and then it reaches a maturity, and then you can cash out after that maturity, or you can renew it. And so we had this investment, and it was coming up on the maturity date was coming up. And so we're getting text messages and emails saying, your maturity date is coming up. So you got to submit these documents if you want to like redeem this investment. And you got to go to your nearest branch. So I go to the nearest branch and ask to speak to go to the SPF branch and ask to speak to their SPF Life guy. They have a special division for life. And then you go talk to the guy. And this guy is not a person that's knowledgeable on this financial product at all. This guy is a guy that's put there.
He's an order taker.
He's a salesman. His like, you're supposed to go there. Like, they've set it up such that the first place you're going to go is you're going to go to your branch, like they tell you to do, and you're going to ask for the life guy, and then the life guy doesn't actually know anything about the product and is going to just tell you to renew it. He's going to do everything he can to convince you to not redeem that investment, even though it's coming up for maturity. So then what he'll like, I went in there like 2 months in advance. He's like, actually, I can't accept this paperwork right now. If I accept it right now, I might lose track of it. I'll tell you what, come in closer to the redemption date and the maturity date. And then, and so I was like, I believed him at first. I just, okay, like at first I got a little bit of a slimy vibe, but like it's not even his fault. Like, that's his job. Like, this is the official bank protocol, right? They don't. So I went back home, and then like I got more messages saying, look, turn in your documents if you want to redeem this at the maturity date. And so I guess they must have some legal obligation to keep letting you know. And so you go back to the branch, and it's the same guy, and he's like, well, I can't really take these right now, but just come back closer to the maturity date.
I got so much going on. I'm going to lose these.
And he's like, and actually before he even says that, he's like, well, so when you do, I mean, what are you thinking about making some new investments? I mean, there's this really great package I've got. It's really safe, and it's got a high rate of return. And I mean, I'm looking at the way the economy is looking over here. They've been cooking the books, lying about it for a while. So I'm just like, things don't look very good. The political situation is kind of sketchy. Like, I could see things getting pretty dark. So I just started asking him some like fairly ridiculous questions, like what happens if the state collapses? What happens to this investment if this happens? And he just had no knowledge about, like, even just a lot of people wouldn't be able to come up with coherent response to that, but he wasn't able to speculate even in like somebody in finance should even be able to at least speculate throw out a few ideas about what could possibly happen. Like, no, these are just really safe. This is guaranteed by the and so he's trying to sell you this product. He's trying to, like, first of all, he's trying to get you to miss the maturity date so that the policy just automatically renews. Or if you take out the money, he wants you to invest in some other stupid thing. And people over here are going to be more inclined to believe it, because if you've paid attention to the growth rates in this part of the world, like when our economy is slowing down, it's still like twice as much as the growth rates that you're going to see in the West. So people are still on that particular honeymoon phase of a more open economy, shall we say, over here, and that the other shoe is going to drop on that one pretty soon. But so I went twice to this guy, and I got the same thing. He's like, first he tries to direct me to these other investments, and then he's like, when I want to give, I was like, no, I just want to redeem this at the maturity dates, and here are the documents, and I just want to leave them with you because that's what it says for me to do.
Yep.
And he's just like, I can't take these, and just come back closer. And like, I keep getting messages to submit these documents, and he's like, okay, I'll tell you what, you need to go to this office. It's in the other, 30 minutes away, a different part of town. And I go expecting to find another branch of SPF Life, whatever name I substituted.
Yep.
And there's no branch at that location. Like there's no visible bank branch at that location.
You're kidding me.
It's in the city. So, but then I'm looking at my Google Maps and it's like, this is the location. This is where it is. And I ask around, I'm wandering around and finally like this is not a regular bank branch. This is like, it's on the second floor. It's a small muggy office with cubicles and you got to go in there and sit down and they got a bunch of kids in there basically, like, you know, fresh out of school, fresh out of college, just working the administrative process behind, you know, actually just submitting the documents and doing what you got to do to redeem this policy when it matures. Now, this is the extent that they go to make it difficult for you to actually redeem this thing, and they're always pushing these new policies, and these are just normal commercial banks. These are just the regular fucking commercial banks over here, and it's really reminiscent of the type of lending that you were seeing pre-crash in North America. And I just feel like the result of this type of thing is going to be a lot worse when it hits over here. I mean, you might be able to guess and speculate and see, oh yeah, I can see why it would be a lot worse if it happened in a place like India. But if you come here and you see the stark inequality and how a shock to the system, like what just happened with COVID, right? The whole world gets COVID, India gets a migrant crisis on top of it, right? So you can see how certain shocks just have these crazy effects that you just wouldn't really be thinking about if you're living in a place like Canada, if you live in a place like America. So what happens when this other foot drops? And all the advertisements you see everywhere, billboards, you know, at least up until like last year, they're all trying to sell that life of success. Like, you know, take out a mortgage, get this type of condominium. Of course, you can be living in this luxury place. Like all the billboards are marketing this lifestyle that everybody wants now. It's the dream. It's the new dream. And so
it's the new dream, and it'll be financed off your credit, and all you got to do is just borrow.
Yeah. Same song, man. Same song, different verse, and we're in Canada. And in parts of the West, we're sort of on the other side of this, in where like that loss of trust in institutions that I had alluded to is kind of has manifested from people feeling betrayed from this type of thing, and that's one example among many. There are many situations where people feel betrayed. So it's, you know, it's a weird scene, weird scenario. But that's that story.
That is crazy. I will say that level of like the banks over here generally, I think the pitfalls are kind of more baked into the system, because I mean what you're talking about is pretty shocking from the behavior of like an employee. Here,
Canadian banking system is also pretty different from the American. To be totally clear, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah,
quite different. I think quite like it's not in a very non-trivial way. Like the amount of different banks they have in the U.S. is quite crazy when you go there for the first time if you're a Canadian, right?
I mean, there's 5 big banks in Canada, and they represent something like 30%. I mean, if you take the capitalization of the Toronto Stock Exchange, the total capitalization, 5 big banks represent about 30% of the entire stock market. So they are a huge part of the Canadian stock market, and as a result, they are a huge part of Canada in general. They're the way that I mean, if I was going to try to tell a story that's anywhere comparable, which mine won't be, but I just think like that sort of that journey of the personal finance journey, of trying to understand, to become a little bit more financially literate, to understand about investments, to understand about how to take care of your own money. I mean, the experiences that I've had at multiple banks have been kind of similar to yours in that, you know, a lot of the people that we would have dealt with over the years that I would have dealt with, they just don't know anything. They just don't know anything. And then when you take the time to go and try to learn and try to figure out what, you know, really smart people in the investment industry are telling you to do, and then you try to apply that to your own situation, it can be pretty difficult. Certainly dealing with the banks here, they've got kind of their own kind of system. They got a menu for you to pick from. The menu of products is really good for them, not really good for you. The fees are just way too high. They're just so high. I mean, you look at what the type of bank mutual fund, and it's about a 1% fee, and what that means over even 10 years or 25 years to you were talking about capital flow, like what it means to your capital. It's a huge hit. You're losing 20-30% of your money depending on what the fees are like. And if you ask for something that's lower, or even if you just say like, hey, I picked out 8 or 10 companies and I really like these companies and they're really great and I want to invest in them, they're like, whoa, that's way too complex for us. You have to go and see the wealth management arm, and then you got to have a minimum capital.
There's that as well. Yeah.
It's like going to the casino. Yeah. It's like, oh, no. You don't get to play at the good table. That's a minimum buy-in. That's $100K buy-in there. You got to be. So, they make it intentionally kind of difficult for you to do the things that after reading and researching and educating yourself, are the right things to do. And even then, it's incredibly difficult. Self-directed investing here is really tough.
Have you... So I've noticed that there are these new emerging sort of investment, I don't know what to call them, but like, say, what's the name of one of them? Wealth something?
Wealthsimple is one of the, that's one of the best known like robo investors or robo advisors.
Yeah. So I don't know anything about this world. Have you learned anything about it? Do you know anything about what, there are some other entities like it as well, no?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, they're an inevitable part of like banking and investment disruption. It's become very popular, and I mean, I can see why it's popular and effective, because it's essentially an algorithm that uses some inputs from the user to create a low cost investment portfolio. And that's the key. It's low cost. And then it's got some sort of an automatic rebalancing thing. So if you've picked a handful of different ETFs or exchange traded funds with very low fees, you basically have ticked most of the boxes for like low cost, passive sort of self-directed investment. And then something like, whatever, one of those robo advisors basically every so often just make sure that the amount that you've invested in each one, or the amount that you have allocated for cash is rebalanced. I don't have any personal experience with them. I still just do self-directed, but I think it's a great thing.
It's intriguing. It's intriguing to me, and I'm not immediately against it. But that theory of reflexivity that I was talking about earlier seems to that's where I would be suspicious of an algorithm. That's the place where an algorithmic type approach could break down, and you need a way for the algorithm to just keep adapting. Now that can be done via machine learning, but it's more about the depth of that about that learning, and whether it really understands the reflexive nature of what human emergent systems are. And then it gets into a weird territory where it's like, if it's just algorithms doing it, but then doing it based on preferences input by humans, then like, is that like a second degree emergent phenomenon where it's like the algorithms emerge from the humans, and then the like actual larger economic behavior emerges from, like, it's weird. And so like this is what I mean. Like, it sounds like frivolous when you raise these like philosophical points, but the reason why these systems break down is because we don't have understanding of some of these more fundamental aspects of the system we're in, the system that we are.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you know what the most successful hedge fund of all time is?
Let's hear it.
It's Renaissance Technologies. Have you ever heard of that?
I think I knew that. Like, I think I read that somewhere. That's it's somewhere. It's ringing a bell, I should say.
It was started by a bunch of mathematicians. The guy whose kind of name goes at the top is a guy named Jim Simons.
This was in Neil Ferguson's book, no?
I think he might have touched on it. Yeah. So James Simons was essentially a math prof. He had won some pretty prestigious math competitions before. He was a guy who, working with another mathematician named Chern, had created a he had essentially solved the geometric problem of it was a way of measuring I think it was a way of measuring spheres. And anyway, he won. I think he actually shared.
Yeah, sounds right out of Neil Ferguson's book. Great book, by the way. Ascent of Money, Neil Ferguson.
Yeah. No, great. It's a great read. And he had wanted to play around with the idea of sort of technical or quantitative investing. It took him a while, but he basically hired a bunch of his friends, other mathematician friends, and they essentially created, after many years of trying, they created an algorithm that invested money. It was a very kind of short-term buy sell positions. It gets super complicated. I've read a couple of books about the guy, and recently I just finished reading one, which is essentially the history of James Simons and throughout his life and the history of Renaissance. But they created a machine that made money by trading in the markets. And at first it was mostly bonds and commodities, and then they eventually figured out something that would work in the stock market. But here's the thing, and what ties in with your point, and basically, they readily admit that they don't understand how it works. At least
machine learning is a black box. Once you learn that about machine learning, it's like actually quite troubling.
Well, they have thousands when they first started, they had thousands of lines of code, and it was, I think, they couldn't get it to work at first because I think there was a comma or something. There was like a semicolon or something that was thrown into the code. And
typical coding humor.
And it took them forever to figure it out, and then eventually it did work. But like even then they still didn't know how it worked. And there was guys in their organization, they were churning out 40% returns per year, and there were people there who didn't understand how it worked.
Theory of reflexivity.
And talking about capital flows, they had so much outside money coming in. I mean, they really got big for a while. They've since closed to any outside money, and they've been closed for a really long time. But they're churning out 40% returns based on algorithm and machine learning, and I mean it's amazing and it's incredible. But they really, I don't think anyone actually knows how it works.
That is a thing with neural networks and machine learning, is that why it's called machine learning. Beyond a certain point, you design the black box, but like what's going on inside the computer is the algorithm is kind of figuring it out. And so that's an issue because it restricts us to like one specific type of reasoning, and algorithmic thinking. And I mean, this could be a poor analogy, but it works for me, and I'm willing to go with it until I'm corrected. But if you look at the way big data does stuff, like even say if you look at when they create a bunch of artificial faces that look real, but they're actually, it's not the face of it, and you go through those and look for the type of mistakes that AI makes. Like AI makes mistakes, or machine learning. I shouldn't say AI. Wrong, but machine learning, like it's not looking at reality the same way you are, and so it's going to miss things down the line. And how can it account for something like reflexivity? How do you do that? If everybody starts running that algorithm, then what does the algorithm start thinking? You know what I mean? Like that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense because algorithms don't think in a way that. But do you know what I'm saying? Like the system affects itself. The system affects itself. So you this is where I think there's a role for machine learning in this stuff. There's a big role for it. And there's probably is actually probably too weak of a word, but there's probably a way in which it's actually beneficial and will actually make the whole understanding better. But you can't rely only on it. I have a strong feeling you can't rely only on it. If you just set up an algorithm and hope for the best, I think you're going to get into some dicey situation. It's going to blow up eventually. That's the way. I mean,
you don't even have to look. You don't even have to look too far back into the history of, if we just want to just talk about the stock market, the flash crashes, and we've seen several of those. And even before the flash crash, if you go back to the 1986 crash, that was essentially, that would have been the first, algorithm crash, because it was the concept of portfolio insurance. That was crazy. You had essentially you had most people, most traders on Wall Street who had, computerized trading was just getting started. And you had this idea of like, well, we're going to buy X, but we're going to hedge it with Y. And basically everyone did the same thing. They'd insured their portfolio using this idea that like, well, if the price starts to fall, we have this trade programmed into our computer that basically sells X and buys Y. And that works if you're one of the only people that have that programmed. But if everybody has that same program, if everyone's been going around selling portfolio insurance for, 18 months or 24, whatever it is, for years, that's how you get Black Monday. Because as soon as prices start to fall a little bit, the computer doesn't know any other way to do things. So they just all sell at the same time. Yeah. And then you had, percentage wise, I think it was the single largest drop in the history of the U.S. market, and that was all because of a computer. That was all because of computer, learning. And well, it wasn't really learning, but that was because of a computer program, portfolio insurance. Yeah. And everyone just kind of chalked it up to that and said, "Oh, well, what an evil thing, portfolio insurance." And then they just kind of brushed it under the rug. They kept going, and no one really ever talked about it again. Yeah. But I mean, I really feel like that was the beginning of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there are a few examples of it, and I think we should learn. We got to come up with a better synthesis.
It's a weird kind of turning point too, because I mean, in a lot of ways, what happens in the markets is very different than actually what happens in the economy. And I remember that being one of the things that was a weird discovery thing for me, because I think my sort of like, if you want to talk about my journey of trying to understand finance and sort of personal financial education is really only about 10 years old or so. Like I really only started taking into account these things and trying to take care of myself and try to learn these things maybe 10 years ago. And that was one of the first things I noticed, was that how you could have, after 2008, and you get into some of the highs that the markets would have hit in, I guess 2011, and then maybe again in a couple of years after that, the economy itself was not doing well, really, by any markers, whether it was by the number of jobs that were created, or housing starts, or whatever those whatever the economic sort of way markers are. The markets were doing amazing. You're talking
stock
about
market is a graph of rich people's feelings, right? Basically.
Yeah. Well, it's a way of it's a way that rich people take money
measure
out of the market,
how they're doing.
Basically. Yeah.
How are you feeling today, Jim? Oh, it's feeling pretty good. That's the stock market.
I'm feeling great.
Yeah, feeling great today, Jim.
So I mean,
same to you, Jim. Same to you, Jim.
That's right, Jim. You're doing great, Jim.
It's good to see you, Jim.
Oh, it's looking great. Everything's looking up. I think they're all named Jim. Yeah, but they're really not connected at all. So it's that was a bit of a shock to me. And anyway, these are the things you start to pick up on.
That kind of it reminds me of something I wanted to say earlier when you were talking about just the power of admitting that you don't know something when it comes to this stuff. Like there was something close to the beginning of this conversation. We were just like, maybe through something like, oh, I don't know. I just had to admit I don't know. And you look at these experts, it seems like they don't know. And there's an issue with people who are really not very sure, but they put out these opinions as something that's quite like, I'm sure about this. I'm an economist. I studied this. I'm sure about this.
CNBC is just gold for that. I mean, just you watch. I mean, you watch Squawk Box in the morning, and you listen to the traders, and they're just, we're so sure this is going to happen, and the worst of this is over, and you there's really no other reaction than just to laugh, because it's like you have dude, you have no idea. You have no idea.
Have you ever heard of that narrative about because if you go more deeper into academic stuff, there's this tendency that people are more open to like, hey, this is just a model. This is something I'm working with. We're trying to figure it out. We don't know. But it's sort of like the relationship between economics and politics is what sort of does it, where you have politicians that pick an economist because their kind of theory works with what we're trying to do. So we bring that person on board. And now the person we've brought on board is favored by politics, and we kind of push this narrative about how this person's understanding of how the economy works is kind of the way it is. I mean, that's sort of like an Alan Greenspan type situation. No, would I be wrong in saying that? Where it's like, so you remove the guy from the academy, and then like you boost up his ego to the point where even he thinks he's knows what's going on, and then the whole thing blows up, and this guy's saying, hey, like the way that I understood the world was wrong apparently. And it's like, oh shit, like
he's great for that.
Yeah.
Greenspan.
At least he said it. At least he said it. There's other people who won't even say it. They'll just die on that hill.
Well, he came out and said that he would favor a return to the gold standard. This was a guy who teamed up with Bush to push along a period of monetary policy that was, which paved the way for where we are now. I mean, super low rates, advocating for removing banking regulation. So the absolute lowest of the low in terms of a regulatory cycle, dangerous monetary policy where rates are just kept artificially low, where savers are punished, where credit expands like crazy. And it worked perfectly for, the sort of Bush's doctrine of, well, we need to take the reins off the economy, take the reins off the market, make sure everyone can buy a house, and make sure everyone has access to credit. And so he was one of those guys who was in favor of democratizing credit, where everybody should have credit, everyone should have a house, everyone should have access to that HELOC, that home equity line of credit. They should be able to borrow whatever they want, take vacations, put granite countertops in their houses, have huge garages with with motorcycles or whatever toys you want.
There won't be any externalities from this.
And what could possibly go wrong? And I mean, that's just so dangerous. I mean, the fundamental idea that everyone should have access to credit, while sort of, I don't know what you would call it, altruistic in some ways, is super dangerous. I mean, if you can't afford to pay it back, you shouldn't be borrowing it. Like, that's the kind of like super simple type of mentality that like, it's like no one even thought to bring that up because
it's worse than that. It's worse than that because you're encouraging people who can't pay back to borrow. It's one thing to say to not have a check in place where if somebody can't pay it back, they somehow end up being able to borrow anyway. I can even kind of understand that from a clemency, like mercy, what you were saying, humanitarian point of view. But it's more just like, but see those people over there, they're not going to be able to pay this back. We're going to convince them to borrow all this money. Like that is kind of there's more of that. I shouldn't say that, not more of it. There's a lot of it, though. I don't know about more or less, but there seems to be a good amount of that, or there was in the system. I don't know what it's like over there now.
Yeah, this group of people over there, we'll get them to borrow a whole bunch of money. We'll get our fat fees. We'll get out of here, and we'll do it before the house comes tumbling down. I mean, that was really...
You completed the circle on that. That's the important point is like we're going to collect from it now and then bounce. If we're smart.
Yeah, that period in time, and we really aren't out of it, and we're in the same period of zero interest rates. Yeah,
I was just about to ask, like, did we learn from this? It seems like we did not.
No, because nothing's changed. I mean, nothing really fundamentally changed. We had no choice, but I mean, the bailout packages after 2008 were significant, and basically said that it was loud and clear. It was like, just keep doing what you're doing. We will take care of this. Yeah, we'll say some things about how publicly that you guys are irresponsible, but basically just keep doing what you're doing.
Lender of last resort? How about lender of first resort?
Man, I remember living in Ontario, and I don't know, maybe the advertising is just like a lot. We got access to more American advertising, but right before the bubble burst, this probably would have been like 05 or 06. I remember seeing the home equity line of credit ads on TV, the American ones. Oh man, they were just so. They were savage. I mean, I don't know what other word to use. They were so transparent. It was just like, it was preying on people's the most like reptilian core of their brain. It was like, look at your neighbor. He's got a new boat and a motorcycle. How dare he? Well, we've got your problem solved. It's a home equity line of credit. Call this number now. Oh, it was just like that.
Brutal. That's so brutal. I mean, like forget savings fund. How about a cravings fund? That's what Mark Blythe was talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you see that? What was the other one? There was another one. There was another ad that he mentioned. But it's like, that's the type. Well, you have a similar type of advertising ecosystem here with it's the aspirational thing, right? It's that whole aspirational thing. And you in the West, you just have a generation of millennials that are just dead in their heart. They have no aspiration. They're just like, fuck this shit. That's what's going on. I think I solved it right there. We cracked it. Let's call the cops. I mean, like,
we're done.
We're done. Because it's like, that's it, right? Like over in the West, you just have a generation that was raised on this idea. You do X, Y, Z. This is how the world works. And especially, I mean, we're on I'm the oldest you can be and still considered. You and I are in the oldest you can be and still be considered a millennial. You might even be Gen X or something. But
I'm a sandwich. I'm like right in between the two.
Yeah. And so it's like the aspiration aspect of it is kind of, it's a joke. Like I think aspiration is the wrong word. More like magical, mystical fantasies. We have those. We have these moments where we're in some sort of fantasy land trying to escape the. There's
so many. It's surreal. It's so surreal. You look at the way that these products get marketed and the way that people act, and you're scratching your head going like, there is going to be some kind of hell to pay.
And the younger generation has no confidence. Younger generation has no confidence in finance and investing. Like people don't want to be doing it.
Yeah, they don't even bother. I mean, that's the thing that, like, I feel like I have, I made a concerted effort to try to teach myself as much as I could, just reading books, just talking to people and reading books. And it's still a conversation that I can't have with pretty much anyone outside of maybe even my own family, or I mean, and you and maybe one other person. Like that's
I can't blame people. It's like it's a very convoluted thing, and nobody actually knows about it. That's the thing. Like, I can't think of one intellectual that actually knows the whole story.
Yeah, it might be too. It's the kind of thing where I don't think you can never know everything. I don't.
That's what I mean. But it's like I just don't think a lot of people realize that. I don't even think a lot of these people who mouth off about this stuff realize that there's nobody that understands this whole picture. That's not the nature of what we're in, because it's an emergent thing. You can't at some level, right? It's like the ant colony trying to study. It's like the ant trying to study and understand how the ant colony works. Like, there's a limitation there. And it's like the only way that we can actually navigate this is if we accept that limitation and kind of work with it, rather than trying to assume that we have a model that just explains everything. Like, I've seen so many different ways of explaining how things work, even within the humanities, even within economics. And that, like, I got to go back to the Perry Marilyn course, right? Like, the money and banking course. If you look at his way of understanding money and banking and how it's just a totally different analysis, and it's great, it's great. And that's not the whole picture. That's not the whole picture. But I really recommend. Did I ever send you those course notes?
I think you did. Yeah. Yep.
An idea of flow is really important. We could probably go on about this kind of stuff for ages, and we should do this again. And I'm not, but I want to. I didn't even we haven't caught up.
Part 2.
Well, we could do this as many times as we want. It's always great to chat with you, but we haven't caught up in a long time, so we have not really. Like, I don't even know what you're up to. I know that I see you doing some woodworking. You were at one point doing some woodworking. Were you not?
That is my thing now. That's how I stay sane in this crazy world. Yeah, I started. I really, really enjoy woodworking and building furniture, and that's been like a thing that's been really good for my soul. So I started when my son was born, and I realized we didn't have a crib, and I thought, I should be able to make a crib. So I bought some wood, and I borrowed some of my dad's old tools. And anyway, I made a crib, and then I was just basically like hooked. I've just been addicted from there. So I've just been like building more interesting, complex, complicated things, and I found that like bits of I found the furniture. Like furniture is my thing. I like building chairs and desks and tables and that kind of stuff.
It's gratifying when it's practical and you can use it.
Yeah.
It was really, really gratifying for me to put together all that milk carton furniture that I had made when I was living in Toronto. And even though it was kind of silly, but when it actually works, you're like, fuck, this is great. This table is solid. I'm down with it.
Oh, that sense of accomplishment is amazing. Yeah. It's really good for your soul. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I noticed that. And I mean, we haven't seen each other in some years. I missed you the last time I was in St. John's when I was doing the Roundelay album. I didn't actually come to see you once, even though I was staying with your brother-in-law oftentimes.
That's right. Yeah, I think the last time we saw each other, I think you came to the house, but that was years ago.
Earlier. Yeah, it was earlier, and it's really just strange to refer to Mike as your brother-in-law. I'm just used to calling him Mike.
That's right.
But yeah. So it's the woodworking thing is really cool, and I mean, how's life generally? What's up?
It's good, man. Things are good. The family's good. We've been keeping well. I think we're kind of fortunate here where just our population's so spread out here that there's, we're able to kind of go outside and not really have to worry too much about distancing because that's, there's a lot of wide open space here. So we've been trying to take advantage of it in the summer and just kind of our weather's actually been half decent. So we've been getting outside and just kind of exploring a little bit.
Weather's half decent.
Half decent pie, this.
Jesus.
It's crazy. We've only
July. It's July. It is actually in that small narrow band when there's good weather in St. John's.
Dude, we had 28 degrees in the end of May.
Go on.
The end of May we had 28 degrees. Go on, bye. Wow. Go on. No, it's been wild. No, everything's good, but we I was trying to remember, when was the first time we actually met? Was that high school?
It was high school. I don't know when we met, but because you were such a funny guy just generally in high school, I was definitely aware of you before we met. Because you were, I think first day of high school, you were just doing some funny shit somewhere.
Yeah, that sounds like me. I was a total weirdo. I just did whatever.
I kind of tried to follow in your footsteps after you graduated, but you were always doing something hilarious, either sanctioned or unofficially, right? Either student council had acquired you to do a thing, and you were formally doing a thing, or you were just being hilarious. But I don't know when we met, and that's actually a good question. I haven't thought of this. I just the first time we bonded on that improv team.
Yes,
I think, right? Yeah.
Yep.
We never shared any classes. That was not possible because I was in the 10th grade, you were in the 12th grade. So we didn't have any classes in common. So it would have had to be from the improv team first, and then drama festival after that. We did Sparks in the Park.
Oh, that's right. Yes, man. Yep. Well, see, that's the thing. I remember when I would have been in grade 10. There, what's funny about that? There was a guy who was in grade 12 who kind of helped me come out of my shell because I was not that outgoing of a person. I always wanted to be funny, and I always wanted to make people laugh, and that was my thing. I was actually very shy, and I actually still am in a lot of ways. I don't really like being the center of attention, but I just really like making people laugh. It's this super weird kind of thing where I don't know. But anyway, I remember being pretty nondescript in grade 10 and just kind of doing whatever. But there was this guy who was in grade 12 who I knew, and he came up to me and he's like, "Hey, there's a talent show. We should do some improv." And I was like, I don't know. In front of the whole school, no. Really? I was like, I don't know. He's like, no, come on, let's just do it. And I remember I just kind of followed his lead, and we took suggestions from the audience. and somebody threw out a name of like a celebrity, kind of like an older celebrity from like the 70s or something. It was super weird, but she had recently passed, and the person threw out the name, and we were looking at each other like, yeah, that person's dead. And anyway, but we just went with it because, yes, and right, because of improv.
Yes.
And so he's like got the microphone and he's telling the story, and I'm just kind of wandering around, acting out, doing the actions, being a mime or whatever. Anyway, he throws out this now since deceased actress's name, which is super weird and sad. And I just like lay down on the ground, like stiff as a board. And I got this huge laugh, like a huge laugh, like I was killing it. And I was just hooked. The same kind of thing. Yeah. I was just completely addicted at that point. So anyway, that was the genesis of my, of improv. So I don't know how that ties in, but it's funny because he was in grade 12. So I don't know. Maybe I was able to help.
Yeah, you did. I never knew that about you. So that you did kind of pass that on. Yeah, I'm trying to. I mean, it's just not. It's impossible to establish the counterfactual. But you had a big influence on me because you guys would do weird announcements and stuff every now and then, and by the 11th grade, and I ended up getting kicked off the PA system in the 12th grade because I said something that I heard you say actually. But yeah, so
oh no! Why? What did I say?
It was the food.
Sorry about that.
The food drive. When the swelling goes down, you'll be glad you came.
Oh no! Yeah, I remember that. That was so. Yeah. Listen, on 100% candidly, 100% honest. That was not written in that way. It was.
Yeah. Well, even when I said it, like in the context of that time, it just sounded like one of those. And in the style of the humor of the time, it was just one of those random sentences that just sound funny. And none of the students understood the joke. It was one teacher that was like, no. Yeah. And so, I was reprimanded for that. But yeah, I mean, that's not important. What is important is my goofiness, the goofy kind of sort of vibe that I had in high school that kind of stuck around for a little bit after that. That was, you played a big role in that for sure.
Oh, that's crazy. Oh, thanks, man. Yeah. Well, that means a lot. I feel like a lot of the stuff I did in high school, I like any of the funny stuff that people thought was funny or thought was good. Honestly, I don't even know where that came from. It was just a super weird kind of unconscious, just expressing yourself kind of high school thing. And I just kind of did it because that was all I really knew how to do. Well,
you're a natural. As far as I can tell, you're a natural. So like that's, it's just something. Well,
it was weird. I don't know. Like I listened to a lot of like British humor growing up because Dad's from Scotland. So I got a lot of weird kind of super dry, super weird British humor, and then I just kind of mixed that in with whatever I saw on TV, and it just sort of. Oh, I don't know. It was just like a stream of consciousness most times, I think.
Yeah, well, that's what it seemed like. But you and James were killing it in the AV room making those first recordings.
I found those the other day.
Yeah,
I found them. They were on a cassette tape.
Oh wow! Yeah, well that makes sense. I think the first time I heard him, it was on a cassette tape. But hey, you found your mic, so now you got your mic back. You can do silly stuff again if you want. I mean, have you seen some of these voiceover clips that I've been posting as I've been doing these voiceovers? I sent you a clip some time ago.
Yes.
But I just get some outlandish voiceovers, and that stuff is quite funny. But because I got this recording set up, I'm sometimes tempted to like just want to do like really silly overdubs of film scenes, that kind of thing. But you got to make time for the silly as you get older. The silliness, unfortunately.
Yeah, what's that line about reclaiming the child of play or whatever? I think I have heard some of the stuff that you've done for medical things. Let's just say that stuff has been. I laughed a lot at that. That was pretty funny because like your voice is incredible. Like you've really done you've developed your voice perfectly for like I can see why. Especially being in India and having like that perfect English.
Well, but here's the thing.
Why that would be in demand.
These are all for companies abroad, dude. That's the thing. It's like these are all for companies in like. Here's the thing: is companies in English-speaking parts of the world, or like maybe Europe or whatever, they want a neutral North American accent. They're too cheap to make their training materials domestically, so they hire this company in Delhi, and then they turn around and they find some random guy like me who's living here and talks like this. So that like at one point, there's an organization in Ontario that outsourced to this company, and then the guy that ends up doing the voiceover is me, and I'm like, I'm kind of a resident of Ontario. I think still in a weird way. So that's weird, and it's crazy how the world works, right? So I'm very very rarely reading anything that's destined for an Indian audience, and the qualities of the script varies.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And the quality of the script varies a lot depending on who's sending, and the instructions, the pronunciation instructions are just totally outrageous. It's very silly. It's been a good gig for me, though. It's good because I can just do it from anywhere, and that is something that's really necessary for me to. Well, given the circumstances of my life, like after I moved to India, and after I had to move to India because my father was sick and he passed away. And my mom is still elderly. She's still getting into trouble. I realize, and I don't have any siblings. So I realize that I have to find work that I can just do from wherever I'm at, because at a moment's notice, I might have to just fly to Calcutta. I might have to go here. I might have to go there. So voiceovers so far are like that, as long as I can just sort of get away to a quiet enough place to quickly record a script. But the scripts I get are very, very weird. Very, very weird.
Yeah. That's cool, man. That's so cool that you've met that has become like a bigger thing for you because it works. It's great, man. Your voice is great.
Oh, thank you. That's yeah. So you it's something you could do pretty easily too, I reckon.
I would enjoy that. I've always kind of wanted to do that a little bit more, but I just I'd have to give up something else to do it, I guess. So.
Yeah. If you've got your hands full, and if you're doing stuff that you like to do, then that's all that matters. I wanted to say one thing before I signed off, but I forgot. It's been a lot of fun chatting with you, catching up with you. We should do this again and keep. We're always in communication anyway. But
this is definitely the first time we've talked in a really long time. But this is cool, man. We covered a lot of ground. Who would have guessed that we'd be talking a lot about finance and economics and kind of world politics and where we're at? No, this has been great.
Somebody get Mr. Barrington on the phone and let him know what we're up to.
Oh man, so he's, by the way, talking about doing voiceover work. A guy who has gotten some gigs at that, Mr. Barrington.
Yeah.
And I love so good.
Those. Yeah, I love those. And wait, I guess that's related to what you do, right? Tourism and stuff.
Yeah. He's done some that similar type work, but he's good, and he's like his voice is like a fine wine. He just kind of gets better with age, and he's what is it? He's known in the industry as this is just going to be a very Canadian reference, but he's like Gordon Pinsent Jr. He's just
really? Well, that's what.
And high praise too. I got by the way,
hell of a
for the Canadian audience, Gordon Pinsent, happy birthday! He just turned 90.
Oh wow! Happy birthday, Gordon Pinsent! Today is Today is July. Just for people to know what's the date. It's July.
What is the date? Today's
14th?
the 15th.
15th.
He turned. I think he turned 90. I think it was a few days ago. It might have been even on the weekend. I'm not sure, but the last couple of days, he turned 90 years old. It's crazy. The rowdy man.
One of my favorite. There's a lot of good memories of Mr. Barrington. One of my favorite ones was the last day of high school. So you weren't around because you graduated obviously 2 years earlier. Last day of high school.
Yep.
And everything is the way it is on the last day of high school. It's just everyone's off doing whatever. And a bunch of us theater-oriented kids, and some of them who hadn't graduated, who were still in the grades below us. Your sister was included in that, I think. Mm-hmm. We went into the theater room and we all sat down on the ground, and Mr. Barrington sat on a chair, and it all felt like we were in preschool. It was like last day of high school, but it all felt like we were in preschool because we're sitting on the floor, and there's Mr. Barrington sitting on a chair in front of us, sort of like a kindergarten or first grade or preschool teacher. Yeah. And he's reads us a story.
Oh, that's amazing.
He reads us a story, I believe. he was reading us a story, or he was telling us a story, one or the other. And then I think it was Mike. Somebody, could have been Mike, but it might have been somebody else. With regards to something that was in the story, the commented was that's a paradox. That's what the person said. Possibly Mike. That's a paradox. And Mr. Barrington just pauses and looks right at us in the most kind of like teacherly way, and just says, "Paradoxes can consume you."
Oh, he threw out some gems over the years. I mean, I remember we were rehearsing for a play, and he just like, I remember, I won't use the person's name, but this person had been very, speaking of consumed, was I think consumed by this play, and was very serious about the role that they were playing, and said something to the effect of, I think they said something like, things would be different if I was directing, or something like this. Something that someone who was full of hormones would say at that age. And I remember Mr. Barrington, he clapped back so hard at this person, not going to give away this person's name, clapped back so hard and said, so-and-so, if you were directing, this play never would have got off the ground. And then turned around and walked away, and we were all just like,
yeah. No, that's how you do it. I feel like there were definitely times when I was a bit too much of a disruption with regards to certain productions, and for that I feel regret, because Mr. Barrington is just he's the best of the best.
Oh, he was the best, man.
So I regret any brattiness and any just ridiculousness that I put him through as a student.
I think he was so good. Just rolled. That was like water off his back. I know. I probably was like. I know, but you got
to put it out there. Because we're too young to know what the hell we're doing.
I remember I got some redemption. Yes, I remember I got some redemption when he was given a teaching award some years after I graduated, and they asked me to come back and present it to him, and it was up at where was it? It was somewhere in Pippi Park. I think it might have been.
That's a good feeling.
And he got, so I actually got to present him the award, and I had a few notes, and I got through like the first paragraph, and I just burst into tears, and I started crying, talking about how great he was. So anyway, that was a fun little moment. It was good.
Yeah. I should let you go, man.
All right, well, that's been great. I think this has been long. This is like 2 hours.
Well over 2 hours. Still recording, right? Everything's good?
Still recording, yeah. I've been checking it. Still good.
Take care, buddy.
Anyway. All right, see you, man.